Childhood is a fundamental base to mankind's psyche. It is the foundation of unquenched curiosity, exceptional imagination, and the crave for adventure, which are essences that pilots a child's direction. But on the other side of the coin, it is also a time when his consciousness is innately consumed by observing the world around him, as he gradually starts to imitate and yield to adult regulations and submit to common behavior and social decorum. But in Steven Spielberg's special case, the whimsical side of the coin always lands upward. I think if you want to know where Spielberg comes from as a director, it requires a look into his own childhood, which he reportedly spent as a bullied outcast. In addition to the absence of his father, it left him enough space to turn to fictional worlds his books never failed to teleport him to. These early life events became the source material to his heartfelt narrative, which reflects essentially on his films. You get A.T. the Extraterrestrial, where a single mother with 3 children and whose middle kid is forging a secret friendship with a straight alien. AI, where a child robot who is capable of love is on a perilous quest to become real in order to be loved back. And even Indiana, who is a heroic archaeologist and the symbol of the new world's badass masculinity, also taps on that fatherlessness notion within the third part of the trilogy. Although most of his movies doesn't originate from his own writings, they are adaptations from best-selling novels, and you get to see the common denominator in the novels he chooses to adapt. The stories and tales of these books identify with Spielberg's own real-life story, as a young individual on an adventurous journey to find meaning despite holdbacks. And Spielberg understood well how to film accordingly, his act of self-expression that touches on the global common sentiment. With its rich content and ease of delivery, it resonated with the vast majority of moviegoers. And that resonance reflected on huge box office sellouts, rendering him among the most prolific movie makers. Hence, I won't be that comfortable using the term blockbuster to define his movies and their universal success. Well, they are big, powerful, and far-reaching in their influence, but I don't think his movies were meant to bust or shatter away, but to unify. Regardless of the amount of explosions and some of life's worst incidents that encompasses his historical films, his films remain simply humane and sentimental, which forms the ethos of his genre. And it is that sentimental ethos that earned his name into an adjective. And the adjective is partly granted due to the change of course modern Hollywood has taken ever since Jaws, E.T. and Jurassic Park, based on his unique visual techniques and the considerable amount of technology ever put to film. In his films, thought is dynamic, and the action is furious, but the key dramatic moments arrive in close-ups. You'll know that it's Spielberg when the camera dollies in on an astounded face, a face shot that he turned into his signature close-up, and you may realize that you are being prepared to see something extraordinary. So that's how he captures the character in front of what he wants you to focus on next. What about what the characters are looking at? A benevolent giant from Ogre's country, a great white shark lurking for blood, a strayed alien from outer space, a homicidal T-Rex on the loose, and countless of staggering figures that the agile complexity of CGI and VFX made unbelievably possible.
And what does we have here?
Special effects prefigured Spielberg's most iconic films, and much of that visual glory is up to ILM, the CGI company George Lucas founded to conjure Star Wars' phenomenal world. It has helped in bringing Spielberg's wildest dreams or nightmares to motion, which brings Carlo Rampaldi's special effects genius to this scene. Rampaldi's mission was to make a real alien, and that is A.T., with a breathing cycle, expressive visage, and astonishing pulsing veins in the alien's hands. And keep in mind that was 1982, and regardless of how stop animation worked, in A.T. they have to make the alien up and running remotely, so that Rampaldi and other PAs doesn't show up on the floor for the kids to partly believe and act like if A.T. was a real alien.
And let's say go. And go!
Spielberg was on the bleeding edge of technology. It must be settled by now that the history of Hollywood's image trickery pays great depth to Spielberg's iconic inputs. Jurassic Park, for instance, is the subtle revolution of special effects, animatronics, and CGI combined. The T-Rex was created as lively as possible through thousands of man-hours work and logical research, from Stan Winston's sensational designs to Dennis Muren's godly CGI supervision at ILM, which marked the first time that digital technology was ever used and which earned ILM its 13th Oscar. Jurassic prequels kept knocking a milestone after the other with the remarkable advancement of CGI and VFX wizardry. It left an impact so great on modern cinema that reportedly it inspired George Lucas to commit Star Wars prequels and motivated Peter Jackson to adapt the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And that motivation later morphed into a co-production between Peter Jackson and Spielberg of the most wondrous adaptations, The Adventures of Tintin, where Weta Digital Effects Company provided the virtual world for Spielberg to fill it up with everything incredible for a great motion capture film. I personally find it the best, and the proof is in the pudding. You get a whimsical variation of photoreal in front of the swoops and dips of virtual cameras. You get the flower-fine textures of turmeric or sand on account of Weta's rendered intelligence. Logical realistic details like the scar on Tintin's cheek to indicate his dauntless nature, or the dirt this working seaman has accumulated on the rim of his pocket. A nice touch. And you get the beautiful transitions that comes as reflections in bubbles or blades that pushes the narrative smoothly forward. The bottom of a whiskey bottle transformed into a telescope. It's only later when that wonderful scene where Haddock, Abusin Sea Captain, sobers up while lost and hallucinating in the desert, right where the crested sand dunes melt into choppy waves, under the musical bravura of John Williams' scoring.
And the hearts of the sailors set for home.
Even the most CG-phobic will appreciate the effort and artistry dedicated to the BFG. The rigidly expressive dreams with fresky tails that's flaring about like fireflies. The porous skin textures of the subversive giants, which is completely fleshed out by Weta's visual magic. And keep in mind, when making a CG-augmented film where mixing live action and motion capture animation, it requires directing on 3 different scales at once, with the floor festooned with snake and camera cables, plus directing most times a child on set, who's a main actor, is a whole nother level of impressive.
He has a really wonderful way with directing children like me. I find he does it in a way that's kind, and he makes sure that you understand what he's just said to you, and I think he does it in a wonderful way.
You from the front.
Ready Player One comes out as Spielberg's most crystallized masterpiece. Around 570 characters were created for the film, of which up to 100 are original designs. And that's not including vehicles or any other digital creation was geniusly weaved into the mix. That when you think of Star Wars or DC movies in comparison, this one reigns supreme. And the film is just another indication of the incredible work he can do with a great source material and his longtime cinematographer Janusz Kaminski. Kaminski have been doing the sweeping imagery ever since Schindler's List, Spielberg's most award-winning and most sentimental movie, which is the hallmark in his historical adaptations portfolio, in which the reveal of his cinematic maturity was on an outrageous display. And that wasn't limited to Schindler, but it came out sporadically in Amistad, Private Ryan, and Lincoln, as a fine and clear demonstration of his familiarity with the world's darkest historical events. There is great emotional achievements that one can experience from watching a Spielberg film, where the visual allure rhymes with the excellent orchestration, under which the allegorical passages of his narratives are equally reflecting the relative sincerity of innocence and the bottomless malice of the universe. It isn't special effects alone that sits him front and center among his contemporaries, nor the distinctive foley which comes effective in his arsenal. But what sets his movies apart is that they don't lack the mystery, the curiosity, and the breadth of moral imagination that makes art great. And those traits can be achieved under 2 circumstances: having a good story and knowing how to tell it. Spielberg is a great storyteller, and that talent stems from his subtle synchronization of the source material paralleled with his deep understanding of human emotion. I believe the essence of his true trademark is channeling childhood's curiosity towards noble endeavors, regardless of life circumstances. That's why his filmmaking isn't that dark or melancholic, no matter how Kafkaesque are the events. There is always that light at the end of the tunnel that he keeps invoking, which makes it evident that his movies, which are a significant act of self-expression, seems also an act of self-portraiture. Once he is a kid who wants to fly no matter how sticky is the ground that he stands on. Once he is Peter Pan who can actually fly through good use of imagination. Other times he is the Redeemer, Oskar Schindler, who wants to save prosecuted innocence from figureless evil, or a big friendly Hollywood giant who is fighting way bigger oppressive giants only to be left alone to do his job, which is bottling dreams to fill the heads of children. And at last, he is also the human who is, even at the face of the mightiest and gravest burdens of responsibilities, have never lost the pure zest of youth.